Good evening. Good evening. It's time to dispassionately discuss today's legislative action. It, to all appearances, has been a slow day. The House did actually have a session, to be fair, but their session was limited to the speaker doing several appointments, but nothing more than that. So not really a pro forma session, but not I'll say a meaningful session. And the Senate just stayed in session long enough to say, hey, we're going to come back on Monday. So what we've got is the Senate is adjourned until Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern, and the House is adjourned until Tuesday at noon. Maybe they'll do some more next week. Who knows? But the president has done a couple of things. So we'll do the simple stuff first, I guess. The president issued a couple of proclamations. The president issued a proclamation. Was published on the 19th, which is yesterday. I missed it. Well, I didn't do a stream yesterday because neither the House or the Senate were in session. But they've got Proclamation 10514, Religious Freedom Day, and then Proclamation 10513, Martin Luther King Jr., Federal Holiday. Again, both of these published yesterday. I'm not going to read them because they're just proclamations. They don't have any force of law at all. They're just, the president sending a nice message, which is great. But it doesn't have the force of law. So you can go to the Federal Register, that's federalregister.gov, and you can look them up yourself. Very straightforward. Okay. Now we're going to go to some other things. So one of the things that the president, obviously the president has a lot of authority, and what the president needs to do is the president occasionally needs to delegate that authority. So the president did issue 2 delegations of authority again this week. They were both published. One of them was published today, and the other one was published on the 18th. The first one, the one published on the 18th, is the delegation of authority under Section 506A1 of the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961. Then the other one is a delegation of authority under Section 6501B2 of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2022. Basically, the delegation of authority under Section 506A1, as far as I can tell, again, not a lawyer, so we'll, but as far as I can tell, what this is delegation of authority to the Secretary of State to draw down $2.85 billion in defense articles and services for assistance to Ukraine, which, whether you think that's appropriate or not is really, I guess, not really terribly material. That's what happened. So 2.85 billion in assistance to Ukraine, and then the other one, the delegation of authority under Section 6501B2, National Defense Authorization Act. This one is related to appointing, delegating the authority to appoint a person to an epidemic preparedness innovation. Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. And basically delegating somebody to sit on that council and as a representative for the United States. So again, not going to spend a horribly long amount of time on those because it's just necessary stuff in the administrative branch, right? There's just a lot of things that the president has to do, and a lot of a lot of making authority, the president just has to delegate because there are too many decisions that need to be made, and that's all the president's doing. Um, okay, now what I want to do, we've got the presidential actions, we've got the House and the Senate, but one of the things that's kind of, I don't know, a turd in the room, I guess, for lack of a better word, is the debt limit. We technically hit the debt limit, I guess, yesterday, and so what you can do is if you go to home.treasury.gov, you can actually go and you can see all this documentation yourself. Um, Secretary Yellen sent something on the 13th to Congress saying, "Hey, you guys better increase the debt limit or eliminate the debt ceiling." So there's two things going on. We started doing this debt ceiling because this was years and years ago. Um, because there was mm, a problem. There was a perception in society that government spending was growing too fast. So we issued this debt ceiling. We changed the law so that Congress couldn't spend over a debt ceiling, um, and without explicitly growing that debt ceiling. Um, and there's a push to eliminate that debt ceiling, to change the law back so that there's no more debt ceiling. So we can just issue debt as much as we want without having to explicitly authorize ourselves to do it. And so what these letters are basically saying is, hey, we're stuck, or we're getting close to the point where we're stuck. So you guys need to either increase the debt ceiling or eliminate the debt ceiling so that we're unstuck. Then on the 19th, Secretary Yellen issued another letter to Congress saying, "Hey, we've hit the wall." Okay, now what that means is the Treasury Department has to go into, they call this extraordinary measures. And basically, what the extraordinary measures amount to is um, taking funds from what they've instituted so far. There are other things that they can do. What they've instituted so far is using the Civil Service Retirement and Disability Fund and Postal Service Retiree Health Benefits funds, um, and basically collecting dues. And instead of those dues going into the funds, using those dues to fund the government, and using interest from those funds to fund the government. That's, as far as I can tell, that's what they're talking about. But that's the only extraordinary measure that they've instituted so far. There are four other ones. There's a government securities investment fund that they can use. There's an exchange stabilization fund that they can use. And then there's a state and local government serious securities that they can use. So it's not like the world has ended. There are things that they can do, and there are laws saying that if they go and use these funds, then after the debt kerfluffle has been resolved, however it's resolved, they have to go and make these funds whole. So it's really basically cash flow management. Effectively, what it sounds like to me is basically cash flow management. But the real question is, why are we in this situation? Um, and and that's, there's a lot of politics in this. So I'm going to try not to be partisan in the way I describe this as best as I can. But over the years, if you remember, we get to these debt ceiling conversations time and time again, and we're just in another one. And what's happening is, as you all know, the House has the Republicans have a small lead on the House, and Democrats have a small lead, a narrow majority in the Senate, and then obviously President Biden is a Democrat. And what President Biden is saying is, look, you're just going to have to increase the debt limit. No strings, no nothing. You're just going to have to increase the debt limit. And what the House Republicans are saying is, look, it's fiscally irresponsible to just continue to raise the debt ceiling. What we need to do is we need to thoughtfully consider how we come up with a balanced budget. Every state has to do it. Every household has to do it. We should have to do it. That's kind of the, and I'm 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 parroting what I'm hearing McCarthy say in press releases, right? I'm sure there's a lot of nuance to that obviously I don't understand the details of federal financing, but broadly speaking, what I am hearing the Republicans say is, look, we just want to talk about and come up with a plan. Yeah, we'll raise the debt ceiling, but we want to come up with a plan to get to a balanced budget. And the Democrats don't want to do that. And it's not, and I'm not denigrating the Democrats in that. If you look at kind of historical Keynesian economic models, leveraging debt in like a Keynesian macroeconomic environment, there's a pretty strong argument that that's a good idea. So I'm not saying that the Democrats are just being contrary. They're not at all. It's just two different philosophies about how you, as a government, as a federal government, maintain fiscal responsibility. That's really all it is. But it is a big difference, right? There's one school of thought that says, no, the federal government needs to behave like any other entity and be very thoughtful about taking on debt. And then there's another school of thought that says, we can't spend like drunken sailors, but we are the reserve currency of the world. Therefore, we have a very strong currency. Therefore, we should be pretty liberal about using debt as a tool to make our economy stronger, right? Those are kind of the two camps. And so what's happening is those two camps right now just really at this point won't talk to each other. Um, and that's why we're where we are right now. Obviously, that can't last because at some point somebody's going to have to blink. Because at some point these extraordinary measures will last. Will keep the government from having to default on debt for some time. But eventually, right, the rope is going to run out. So the real question is who's going to blink first? And it's kind of interesting because if you look at it, I've been doing this for I don't know since Congress started this year, right? Since the 118th Congress started, and aside from that initial push of getting a couple of little things passed that were I'll say visual, in not really um, useful in terms of because they're going to get vetoed anyway, or they're going to get or they won't even pass the Senate. Aside from that initial push, there really hasn't been honestly even sessions, open sessions where the full Congress, where the full House has met, or the full Senate has met. So you're looking at this and you're thinking, well, this is kind of a big deal, but the House and the Senate aren't even really meeting, and it's I don't know if troubling is the right word. It's certainly I don't know. It's certainly an interesting way to play politics. So we'll have to see what happens there. We'll just have to see what happens there. So I'm excited to see where they end up, who blinks first, and why. But in the interim, I guess it's weekend time. So have lovely weekends all, and we'll hopefully talk next week. Thanks. Bye bye.